Step into the world of trailblazing gallery owner Marc Benda. Discover the secrets behind curating stunning expositions, fostering artist relationships, embracing the future, and navigating the ever-evolving art landscape. It's time to dive in.
Marc, how are you?
Good, excellent. How are you?
I'm doing well. What have you been up to these days?
Well, trying to enjoy summer, but it's been an exceptionally busy summer.
How so?
We're going to open a gallery in Paris to expand our footprint globally, and we just closed the lease, and it's a lot of preparation to do.
I was going to ask why Paris, but I think the question answers itself. Tell me a little bit about this project, because you recently opened in LA, would be a year ago?
3 years ago, soon. 2 years.
Yeah.
2 years ago soon. Yes. Well, LA was a very different exercise in that we're exhibiting in a house, in a domestic home, and along with the art program that is our sister gallery, Albert Benda, and we wanted to see how our program works in a domestic setting, and we also wanted to expose what we do outside of New York and really expand in the United States. Paris is a whole different animal. Paris is the global capital of design dealing. It's been that ever since the idea of dealing in design has started. It's where I started my career. Very, very humble starts of a career, I have to say. But still, those were my first steps. And I think since a few factors came into play, Paris has also in the art market has really become the hub for all of Europe. And we'd like to be part of that dialogue.
Is that a different approach for you for the gallery opening in Paris that you're interested in exploring, or it's going to be very similar to what you already have done it here in the US?
Look, I have no interest in just building a satellite. In just saying, okay, whatever we do, we're gonna put on a container and ship over there. No, we're looking to be part of the cultural dialogue in Paris and in France and more broadly in Europe, and over time it will develop its own identity.
So what's the timeline right now? You said you just recently got the list ready. Do you have a date in mind that you want to be
Well,
open to
that's
the
what I'm
public?
so busy with. I'm hoping to open early next year.
Well, ambitious.
Yes.
Very excited. You mentioned early on about your very early humble beginnings, and you started in Paris. Can you tell me a little bit about those days?
Yes, we're talking about mid-90s. I was what we call a runner. I would go early to the flea market, find things that I was 19, so it's a very basic concept. You find things that you think you pay less than what somebody else would pay for. So you go early to the flea market before it's picked over. You try to find an object that is just on the back of a truck and that you can secure before someone else sees it. And I worked with a few of the established dealers, and I would sort of call them and say, hey, so-and-so has this piece. Do you think it's something important? And then you would either try to buy it with them and do it in partnership, or they would give you a commission for a sort of finder's fee.
Can you remember any special piece that you found that kind of stand out to you? They still kind of a little metal, like something you surprised that you couldn't believe you found this piece.
Yes, and I never had such a stroke of luck again. I found a sort of metal jardiniere. That's a sort of outdoor sort of console thing that you put a flower pot in. And I just thought it was unusual and interesting. And I called a dealer called Yves Gastou, who was a legendary dealer in Paris. And he asked me to come to the gallery the next day, gave me a commission and said, what you found is a piece by Giacometti. And I'm still proud of that, actually.
Now, back then, did you know what you have in your hands, or were you surprised?
I had no idea. But as a dealer, when you do this, especially when you're starting out, you have to rely on your instinct, on your intuition about an object. There's no way, you go to the flea market and you see things that spans centuries in so many different fields. You cannot not be a specialist in everything. So what you have to rely on is your intuition about the strength and the importance of an object.
And you said you were 19 back then.
Yes, I started around that age, yes.
And what made you start pursuing that career? What about, going to the flea market, looking for those vintage pieces, try to make a profit on top of that made it so interesting to you?
I did that as a child with my parents. They were collectors and took me to the flea market. My poor brother hated it, but I really enjoyed it. So, and it's always the same thing as with children. When you are interested in something, you learn fast and you keep your eyes open, and your imagination runs wild. So I started collecting things at a very early age too, and had a sort of collector's instinct in objects.
So how do you develop that collector instinct? Is by being exposed? Is by really being involved around artists, being exposed to great design? What do you kind of think would be the recipe for something like that?
I think it's completely innate. I see it's a bug, right? Collecting. I see people who have absolutely no inclination to collect things, and I see people who do, and it's something that's in you. So when you're exposed to it, it's already something in you that responds to that.
Now, 19-year-old, you finally found this great piece, and you started kind of really getting something going. With your career, really pursuing that path. Were you already planning at that age to have your own gallery or be more involved in the industry, or was more just almost like not a side hustle, but as an opportunity to make money on the side?
Um, there wasn't really a plan. I knew what I liked, but the real plan was I wanted to get an education, and that was also the idea culturally. You need a degree and so on. So I went from there to Sotheby's Institute, which is a school that is run by the Sotheby's auction house, which was an incredible education, again, in honing your eye. You look at old master paintings, you look at ancient antiquities, you look at English silver from the 18th century. Not all of it interested me, but it all helped hone my eye. And then I went to study business and economics for 4 years first. And the dealing was a side hustle from that.
What
Until
about
I
that
finished.
experience? Sorry, say that again.
No, I said it was really a side hustle during my studies, but in my head it was the other way around. My studies were a side hustle to what I really wanted to do.
What about those days at the Sotheby's that kind of stand out to you? What do you remember about those?
The scale of it all. You go to the flea market, you know a few people, you make a few sales, and then you go to one of the largest institutions in the field, and you realize just how vast the possibilities are. That was my first impression. Just there's a lot of room for me to grow. This is a real possibility of building a life around.
And then in business school, the goal was to still in our business was very much just pursuing, diploma and then see where life takes you.
Yes, especially economics was also an interest of mine. I like to understand context, and and I love numbers. So economics is really a study of context and numbers in a way. But I didn't connect it to it. It wasn't that I thought that would help me build a business later. It was that was really just a pursuit of an interest of mine. Um, I Yeah, it's really that in those years I actually still do that. A lot is based on intuition. You see something, you're interested in it, you research it, and you follow the thread, right?
Mm-hmm. And I find this very interesting because you mentioned you very much follow the thread, as you mentioned,
Mhm.
intuitions, interests that you have, our world, economics, and everything. But at what point did you start putting all together? Did you realize as you mentioned, there is a synergy here, there's a crossover. I can do both, I can merge both, and I can make a successful living pursuing both interests.
It happened very organically. As part of my side hustle, I looked to develop relationships with very established dealers. And one of these relationships, the most fruitful of them was with Barry Friedman, who at the time was one of the biggest dealers in our universe. He was based in New York. I heard about him since I was a child. The conversation was always, he's the best. We can't afford to buy from him, but we wish we could, and he was very generous with me. We met when I was 20, 21, and very quickly said that he wanted me to supply him with great things if I found him. And he allowed me to partner with him. And before I finished my studies, he made me a job offer. He said I should come to New York. He would love to train me. He thought I had a lot to learn, but he also thought that I had a lot to offer for him.
What was like that call when he talked to you? I don't know if it was a call or in person, but he goes like, was a call. What was like? Like you had a call with this guy, as you mentioned, considered one of the best, someone that you respect and admire, and he says, "Hey, I see something on you. I want you to come in and work with me."
I learned a lot from that call because he called me and said, "I know you're about to graduate from school in 6 months, and I want you to come." And what I learned was how important information is. He knew about my situation. I didn't tell him. I have no idea how he found out. I never asked him. But he basically came and said, "I think we have a lot to do together, and I know the timing is now for you to figure out if you want to work with me or not." And it showed me how a leader like him is decisive, understands timing, and follows. He was following me. He knew he wanted something from me, and he waited for the right moment. And I was thrilled.
And that was your first time in New York?
No, I'd been once as a teenager, but then I went to New York regularly. I would go once or twice a year during the auctions, always to scope out the market, to understand the network of dealers. New York was one of the key, besides Paris, that was the biggest market. So I always knew I wanted to end up in New York. Even though I lived in a lot of different places, I knew that New York would be the place where I wanted to build my existence as an adult.
What about New York? I mean, was it just the scale of the industry around the city, or anything specific about the city that attracted you?
I'll try to speak about it from the perspective of a 20-year-old, 25-year-old. It was the energy. I grew up I grew up in Zurich in Switzerland, which is a wonderful place. It's safe, it's clean, trains run on time. People complain about everything, and everyone knows there's nothing to complain about. The food is good quality, the water is drinkable, all these things. And I wanted out of that. I wanted out of that security. I wanted out of that safety. I wanted to go in a place that had a raw energy. And I had lived in a few places that had that, but to me, New York was really the center of the universe in terms of what I wanted to do. And it was a place where contemporary culture was really formed. I felt like if you make it in New York, you can really be part of a global dialogue.
So what was like a 25-year-old now in New York City, in the center of the universe as you speak, and as well working under some of the most respectful dealer in the world. Tell me about those days, those years for you, what it looks like.
Well, at 25, if you're lucky, you're fearless. So you don't shrink from it all. You think, okay, I'm going to conquer this all. I want to meet everyone. I want to sell to everyone. I want to buy from everyone. I came with a bag full of optimism. And at no point did I consider that this was not the path.
Do you still think New York is still like the same energy, or is still like the center of the world when it comes to the dealer industry and design world in general, or things have shifted more on a global level?
I think maybe things have shifted, but I think my perspective has also shifted. I see, I have a bigger overview of the landscape than I did back then, and I think it's naive to think that there's one center of anything in the world. There's always we live in a multipolar world, and there's not one place that can encapsulate all these different poles, and that is one key reason why we're going to open in Paris. I'm not going to keep plugging the Paris Gallery, but just to say that is that understanding that there are different, sometimes competing, sometimes symbiotically living in parallel dialogues that are interesting. So I don't want to think that New York is the only center, but New York is definitely a big center. And in the last 20 years, a lot has happened here. New
Yeah.
York is a living and breathing entity that doesn't stand still.
Never.
Yeah.
Now, and then in 2007, you opened the gallery.
Yes.
Now, I want to kind of if you could, go back in time and tell me the last 24 hours before the opening, what was happening?
I called Barry at 10 p.m. I said, "Have you ever considered what happens if you fail?" And he said, "No." And I hung up and said, "Thank you." More or less. This is paraphrasing, but I was nervous. The opening show was going to be with Ettore Sottsass, who was the biggest living legend in our field at the time. It would have been the second time we showed him, but the container was late. The pieces were not here. So about a month before the show opening, we had to change it into an event that we did with Ron Arad for just the opening night, and then we basically closed the gallery again to reinstall Sottsass. In the end, it was wonderful. It was a wonderful opening. It was extremely well attended, and it showed that there was a demand for what we were doing. There was a demand, there was an interest in bringing design into a contemporary art dialogue the way we wanted to do.
Yeah, right off the bat, for everything I've been reading, doing some research, it was super well received. And as you mentioned, there was definitely demand for that. Tell me about the dialogue among yourselves that decided how to make that big exhibition, how to pursue the first year of exhibitions, and what are you going to be showing in the gallery to really kind of establish your name in a market that it is, as you mentioned before, with some big players that's been doing this for quite some time.
Basically, you keep your powder dry. We led up to it for about a year and a half, and we wanted in the first year, 2 years, we wanted to just show the best of what we conceived we could possibly show. But then building a gallery program, any galleries can tell you, there are so many unknowns, and there's so much that is also essentially what makes this job so interesting is that you're dealing with artists, you're dealing with making things, you're dealing with logistics. There's so much that you can't predict and that you need to be able to respond to in order to put up the sort of shows the quality of the shows you wanted.
I think often enough people don't realize what the behind the scenes and what it takes. As you mentioned before, the logistics, the organization, there's a lot of planning behind the time. So on a perfect world scenario, what's the time frame in terms of the time that you decided to pursue an exhibition and up to the point that exhibitions are going to be open?
We plan about 2.5 years in advance. And I can say at least 50% of the shows do not happen at the time that we originally had foreseen. So it's a lot of planning.
Is that any specific show, maybe in the last 15 years of the gallery, that you're very close to make it happen, but it didn't work out?
Yeah, there's been a few close calls.
It still hurts to talk about it.
No, it's part of the process. Yeah. I'm proud of how many we were able to make happen, to be honest. If you look at how much we have been able to juggle with all the input that goes into it, I don't really think about the failures. I see the failures as learning processes.
So let's switch gear and talk a little bit about the relationship with the artists, because it is an enormous part of the job as well. How are you represent a great roster of very well known, but also you always bring emerging designers to exhibit as well. How do you balance those two things? And is that a different dynamic that you have with an artist and a designer who are, super established, has a presence, has a name, and choose, a young emerging designer who's just trying to get their name out there?
It's a lot of questions in one. So First of all, the dialogue with the artist is usually very deep. An artist is not a supplier of goods. An artist and a gallery work together on the basis that the artist has to be comfortable that the gallery is actually representing them in a way that they want to be represented to the world. The gallery has to be comfortable with an artist that they continue to make things, to postulate ideas, right, that continue to stay relevant. And that is one of the bases. So it has to do a lot with trust. It has to do a lot with understanding, and with allowing, with that inclusion, right? You're not just saying, here, this is my rigid framework as a gallery. You can either be in or out, but this is a cloud. You expand and you say, I love what you do. Our system can expand, so we can include you, right? It's a very, very dynamic way of looking at it. To start out, the gallery showed almost exclusively very established designers, and that was a recognition that I wanted to learn from them. That was my own instinct. I wanted to work with artists, designers who have, some for years, some for decades, built a career that I can have a dialogue to gain a deeper understanding. It wasn't until, I believe, 2010 that we showed the first young designer, and that was Joris Larman, and that was a very lucky stroke because he's become a very prominent voice in the field. So it started out with this sort of canon of design, the Sotzos, Ron Arad, Shiro Kuramata, figures like that. And then I realized that was not enough. So I wanted to expand geographically, and I wanted to expand generationally, because I realized that what I learned from them was not the same thing I can learn from people one generation down, people who were 15, 20 years older than me, who were at a very different stage in their careers. And the younger designers, it was very interesting. The dynamic is completely different, because very often they ask me questions that I would have asked prior to the older generations. So if you look at the gallery as an institution, it was very much a give and take, that sometimes the script reverses depending on the age of the designer.
When you're having those conversations with the artists, do you find yourself, I don't want to say repeating yourself, but do you find there's a common thread of the personality trait of those artists? They all share something in common, and that's why they do what they do?
If you look at the whole field, no. If you look at those we work with, it's based on personality. It's all people that we trust and that trust us, and it's all people that we actually enjoy working with. I'm not giving you much in terms of your answer, but if there was such a common trait, then the work would also be more uniform. And I absolutely have no intentions of building a homogeneous program in any form or way.
Is there any of the artists that you're currently working with that you really had to work? I mean, all of them, I'm sure you have to work very hard to get them on board and develop the trust. But one is specific, a story of something that you remember being like a learning curve opportunity just to deal with that artist, and how we can, welcome that person to be part of your roster.
I'm not going to name names, but I think the most interesting challenge is always to deal with cultural differences. When you work with designers from Brazil, or you work with designers from Korea, you work with designers from France, you work with a designer from America, obviously it's too easy to generalize based on cultural stereotypes, but these cultures are vastly different.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not only shown in what they do, but also how people are. And this is one of my most interesting challenges, is to establish a dialogue that allows us to keep that dialogue with the artist true to their culture, and to be able to bring that culture to our audience, as opposed to the other way around, where we bring our audience to the artist and say, produce for that audience. It's telling the audience, come and learn who this person is, as opposed to the other way around.
How involved are you, if you're involved at all, in terms of the development of the exhibition? Like, really, when the artists are crafting and coming up with ideas and executing the ideas, are you involved throughout the whole process, giving feedback, or you kind of just let the artist do her thing?
Depends on the artist. Certain artists, I would say, why don't we do a show in 2 years? It's time. In 2 years, there's this or that context that makes sense. And then they show me a proposal 6 months later, and a year and a half later, they produce the show. But there's always a dialogue. There's always an exchange. But to what degree, and even on what aspects, is completely individual with each artist. There are artists who write me daily and say, "What do you think of this? What do you think of that? What do you think of this? And what about that?" There's no, with all these things, I really can't generalize.
But it's been nice, though, to know that people rely on your feedback and your opinion in respect so much that once you involved throughout the process.
It's like family. It's you grow up and you have a relationship with your parents, and then you have, some of us eventually have children, and you realize that it's a very different dynamic, but that that you develop a mutual trust and a way to live together.
Is it hard for you to keep the balance between being respectful and appreciated the artistic expression and the creativity and their vision, but also you run in a gallery and you want to make sure that the product, not the product, but the art that you're being exhibiting, find a home. You can market that as well. You can sell it. How do you balance those two worlds?
First of all, by not seeing them as two worlds. I think an important part, as someone who works in between two worlds, right, is to understand who do you represent first. And in our case, as a gallery, we are artist-centric. We represent the artist towards the market. But then there are certain things that the market demands and that we demand too. And that's the quality of the artwork, that's the quality of the execution, it's the quality of the narrative, it's the strength of the narrative. And that's where we are very insistent with the artists, that if you make something that looks good but has no meaning, then it's not going to last. If you make something that looks good but is badly crafted, it's not going to last. So I think you have a fiduciary duty with the artists, in the sense that they trust you with their work. You have to represent that.
Not someone from being the outside. When I look at our world these days and all what's going on, there's so much information. It's one of those industries that is being hot for quite some time. Not only, of course, you have your trade shows, not trade shows, you have your fairs, like your freezes of the world and
trade shows
Miami
too.
and so on. Exactly. Is that something that you see will continue in the future, that your clients, when you talk to them, do they enjoy attending those fairs? They're looking forward to it. And for you as a gallery, do you find it's a good investment to be part of those fairs as well?
I do now. For many years, I actually stayed away from doing fairs. We did one a year for many years, and I didn't see the value. Partially, it was because at the beginning, I wanted to build a program before we just went out and threw things at people. I wanted to have that diversity before I was just going out to do that. I do see the value. I think that fairs are real life meeting places that set a specific date, a specific place for everyone. And I'm really putting it very basic. Where do fairs come from? In medieval times, you had these market towns. And
Yeah.
you in mid-October, you went to Nuremberg, I don't know where, and the whole world came to there, and everyone. It was a confluence of people. And fairs are very similar. It's a traveling circus, but it's also a nice thing. I do Basel. I'm from Switzerland. Every year, I know I see a number of people, couple dozen people that I only see once a year, but we always make sure that we see each other. And it's not only transactional, but it can be. In terms of the flood of information, that's a very important point, because you're one of many, and then you're one industry of many, and then you need to bring across what you're trying to say. So for that, a clarity of the message is very important, and not to get distracted, and not to constantly think, oh, they're doing that, I need to do that too. You need to have a sort of resting place where okay, this is what I'm communicating, and if that arrives, I'm already doing a good job.
Where do you stand with NFTs and some of the most dynamic virtual augmented realities that are coming out, and people seem to be excited about it?
So in terms of augmented reality, design has a way of incorporating new technology as tools. We worked with rapid prototyping very early. We worked with 3D printing. We worked with purely virtual ideas very early. So I'm very excited by the possibilities, but those possibilities come through the filter of an artist's vision to us. We've seen phenomenal ideas, and we've seen things that look like phenomenal ideas, and then a couple of years later, any 4-year-old could do it on their phones, and they're just a sort of remnant of a moment in time. In terms of NFTs, I think um, it's a typical development of something like that when it becomes an investment bubble, that it has to get out of the system of that speculation first. I have no doubt that there's a future for this. I have no doubt that there
Hmm.
are very valid and important artists working within these digital possibilities. Um, for me, an NFT is a contract, nothing else and nothing more. It's just a contract in the blockchain. So if you look at the artworks that were done there, yes, there was a lot of um, excess production, let's say. But as a basis, I think it's an important expression of our time.
I like to play a role game every once in a while with people that I talk to, and one of them is that if you had the chance to go back in time in any part of history, where would you go?
I, I, I read a lot about history. It's one of my personal passions. So I, I think I would be at some point in the Enlightenment, when when a number of scientists and philosophers started to grasp at what we know today. And they intuitively knew it, but they had to prove it because no one believed them.
Mm.
The start of the discourse of what is a civil society. In the same room, you have other people that say, wait a minute, I discovered gravity, and I know it exists. And here's the math. I know none of you can read this, but trust me, there's a reason why we are not just flying around and why we are walking on Earth. And at the same time, people who said, listen, if we put a boat on this in this direction, we're going to find land. We know that. We just have to prove it. To that sort of confluence, that time where everything was possible and was really the foundation for modernity, that would be an interesting time.
I'm going to ask an even harder question: is that if you have opportunity to have a dinner party with half a dozen of anybody in history,
Hmm.
who would you pick?
I don't have that list. There's too many visuals that come to mind, honestly. But again, it would be with people who are thought leaders in their field, and it would be people from completely different fields.
You gave me the sense that you're someone who's very confident, but also very, you feel like very optimistic
Mhm.
about the future. Am I picking this right?
Look, I'm aware of all the problems that we have, of ecological problems, economic challenges, political challenges everywhere. I think part of the optimism is based on the fact that humanity has had some horrible moments, but we have always overcome them. That we are an incredibly industrious species who, when necessary, can figure things out. But I'm not a blind optimist, and I'm definitely by culture and background someone who questions everything at the same time. So yes, I'm an optimist, but with caveats.
Before I let you go, there's three questions that I ask everybody as well that comes to the podcast that people enjoy quite a bit. And if you have the opportunity to already listen, it's one of our previous episodes. It's going to be, we need you to recommend us a book, something to watch. Could be a movie, a TV show, a documentary. And who should we invite for to be a guest in the next episode?
Okay, book. I reread it recently. It's probably something you wouldn't expect. It's a book called Four Queens by Nancy Goldstone, and she looks at a family of a Provençal, I believe he was a count, who had four daughters, and all four daughters went on to become queens in different countries. And it's beautifully written. The intricacy of these very strong women who ruled countries that were more often at odds than not. One was the French queen, the other one was the English queen. And what they achieved in terms of achieving a peace between these countries, and what they, by their upbringing, brought to their leadership is fascinating. That'd be one book.
Okay.
Movie. I have a 6-year-old, and I just showed him Rango last week. I don't know if you know the movie.
Yeah, I have a 6-year-old too.
Okay. Oh, you do. I just thought it was wonderfully ridiculous and beautifully written and drawn and everything. And it's a movie that is not very often cited, but I thought it was just a funny, wonderful movie for the summer. And sorry, what was your third question?
Who do you think we should invite it to be our guest here?
I hate singling out any of our artists on the roster, but I think you should invite Samuel Ross if you haven't already.
Okay. Yeah.
He's at a fascinating moment in his career. I'm wearing his headphones that just arrived yesterday in the mail that he did with Apple and Beats. He's so multi talented that I think you would have a field day interviewing him.
We'll put it in the list for sure. So during the process before getting ready for a conversation, one thing stick out to me when I was reading, someone called you a trailblazer on the interview. And I'm not going to ask if you feel like you were one, because I think I know the answer to that. You will give me a very profound intellect conversation in answer to this, but I would have to agree. I think you have an incredible north balance, know exactly what you pursuing. You have a clear vision what the gallery is and what it can be and wanted to be, and that per se is one of the many reasons why we reach out, and we're thrilled to have you here with us. And thanks again for taking the time. I appreciate it. It was a lovely conversation. I'm walking away with some very interesting perspective, things to think about it, and things to look forward to it as the gallery and you move on to the next endeavor in Paris and on.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing you in real life.
Minded Podcast, powered by the CDA. New episodes every Tuesday.